Hey guys, it's Max. Welcome to my review of the 5D Mark IV. This is Canon's long-awaited update to the 5D Mark III, and unfortunately, it doesn't live up to the expectations as far as the video side. Now, I do want to let you guys know that I'm going to be focused more on video. I'm going to touch on photo just a little bit, but as a filmmaker, that is my main focus, so that's what I'm going to be talking about. So if you want a good review on the photo side, I would go check out Tony Northrup's review, and he covers that fairly well. Now, I do want to touch on the photo side just a little bit. If you're somebody who has a 5D Mark II or 5D Mark III, this is the camera for you if you don't want to switch systems. This is the main intention for this camera. If you want better low light, better dynamic range, faster autofocusing, a better buffer system, some higher resolution, this is the main intention, the reason why Canon made this camera. Now, when you compare this camera on the photo side to some of the other options that are out there, the Pentax K1, the Nikon offerings, it doesn't really stack up as well in most areas. It doesn't mean it's not a bad camera. It does great for photography. If you're a wedding photographer, and especially if you're already at the Canon line, this is what you want to go for. But the other brands have better resolutions, better low lights, so maybe better autofocusing system, sensor-based stabilization, some really innovations. And what Canon did here on the photo side is they just improved everything, took everything a little bit better. So I let a photographer friend use this, and she shoots with two 5D Mark IIIs when we were shooting a wedding together, and she loved it. She was happy how quick it was. She liked the touch screen on the back. The photos look great, so she was happy, and she's going to be stepping up to this camera. It's going to serve her well. It's reliable. It's rugged. It gets the job done. So if that's your main thing you're looking for, you want to upgrade to your other Canon camera that you've been using for a while, this is it. But there's other cameras that provide better value for the money compared to this. So that's kind of my take on the photography side. The dynamic range is good, the low light is good. It takes great pictures. So I couldn't fault you for getting this camera if you already are shooting with Canon. But if you're coming from, let's say, some other kind of camera line, or you're just getting in, I would really look at the other options that are available before you spend $3,500 on this body. Now, the next thing I want to talk about that I briefly mentioned is the touchscreen. Canon did put a touchscreen on this camera, and it's really fantastic. It doesn't flip out or anything like that, which would have been nice, but the touchscreen itself, the display is nice. It's very easy to use. Going through the menus, it speeds it up. Pinching in to zoom to check your focus is really nice. So I'm very glad that Canon stepped it up and finally offered a touchscreen in a pro level camera, and along with their latest 1D camera. As far as the touchscreen for video, the autofocusing system is much improved, and for photos as well. If you're going to use live view, before it was very slow, and now it's much better with the dual pixel, and having the touchscreen, you're able to select different things and have them track or set your focus point, stuff like that. So that is very nice. As far as ergonomically, personally, the camera is a little bit too big for me now that I'm used to mirrorless. I think like a GH4 size camera is perfect, so slightly smaller than this, but it fits in the hand well. All your dials are your controls. I used to shoot with Canon for a number of years, very familiar, and it's nice to use. Now, one thing when I was shooting with this camera and testing it out as far as the photo side, two things actually that kind of bugged me, or I realized, is the optical viewfinder. While it's nice, you can't tell your exposure. So when I started shooting with this, I'm underexposing, I'm overexposing, I'm taking the photos, having a look at the screen, and with the EVF, you're looking through, you're seeing your exact exposure. It's just, I realized how much nicer it is to have a viewfinder. And most of these new mirrorless cameras, the viewfinders are really nice. They don't have a lot of lag or anything like that. So I was definitely missing having that electronic viewfinder. And like I mentioned, this doesn't flip up or down. So when I was taking photos, I was taking some really low shots, some higher stuff, and not being able to tilt the screen is really a bummer. It just makes it difficult. You're kind of leaning down, trying to look. So on the photo side, those are two things that would have been really cool to have. I know some companies do actually have hybrids where it's electronic and optical. So that's going to be the end of the photo section. Let's move into video. On the video side, the first thing I want to talk about is the 4K crop. I think this is the biggest disappointment, and the thing that ruins this camera the most is it has a 1.8 times crop when you go into 4K. I know a lot of video shooters that have been shooting Canon for years, and they've been holding off from upgrading because they're waiting for a new Canon camera that has 4K. That's basically all they wanted. They want good usable 4K. They've been ignoring all the innovation at Sony, at Panasonic, and they've just been holding off. They know they like the actual camera feel, they're used to it, they have a bunch of lenses, the good reliability, they just want a 4K decent image. That's all they're asking for. Well, that doesn't really work out because at a 1.8 times crop, that's using less than half of the sensor. It's actually slightly closer to a micro four thirds sensor than even a crop sensor. So like a T6i, it's using more of a sensor, larger sensor size than this in 4K mode. Now, why is that a problem? Well, it's really a problem in every aspect. If you like the full frame look, that's gone. You have more in focus than with the crop sensor. The low light is worse because you're using a lot less of the sensor. Think of a micro four thirds sensor low light. You have not as sharp image compared to if you're using the full sensor and downsampling all that data like the A6300 or the new X-T2. And you're cropping in on all your lenses. Well, one, it's hard to get a wide shot. Two, your lenses don't work the same way as in 1080p. And three, they're just not as sharp because you're using less of the glass. So your full frame lenses become basically less sharp. So really it's a downside in every single area. Now, why did they do this? Well, maybe they did this because they don't want to cannibalize their cinema line. Maybe they just didn't want this to have great 4K. They want to just say, hey, you guys want 4K, been asking it for years, we'll give you 4K, but it's not going to be really good. Or they just wanted to save money. The reason why it has to crop in that much is because the processor is not fast enough to sample more of the sensor and then process that data into 4K video. By cropping in that much, they're just doing a pixel for pixel readout, and it's much easier on the processor itself. So the processor isn't fast enough and it has to do that 4K, and it really hurts this camera. Now on top of that, to make things even worse, the HDMI output won't put out 4K either, only 1080p. They came out and they said, well, we didn't have access to the proper HDMI chip to be able to do that. Well, a $600 Panasonic camera has 4K out. So I think they're purposely either not wanting to spend the money to have better profit margins, or they want to not enable those features to force people either to go to a different brand, which is not smart, or step up to their cinema line. So with the 4K crop, it's 1.8x. You really need to be using crop sensor lenses because you have a proper field of view and it's going to be actually a sharper image. But the Canon crop sensor lenses, they actually have a little piece of plastic that doesn't let you use it on full frame. You can mod the lenses, but it's going to probably void your warranty, and there's a little bit of risk involved as well. So now you have a crop sensor camera that can't use crop sensor lenses. Now there's one way to fix this. It's using crop sensor lenses like the Sigma line, Tamron, Tokina, all those lenses here. So here I have a 50 to 100 1.8. Now it's still not using all of this lens because it's 1.8 crop instead of like a 1.5, which this lens is designed for. But you're getting a sharper image and you're getting a really nice fast zoom lens. You can also use the 18 to 35, which I'm shooting with right now. So I did some testing with the 4K quality as far as the detail, the sharpness, and the Canon really was terrible compared to even like a $700 Panasonic camera, and really got smoked by the A6300 and the X-T2. Now a lot of people came back and said, hey, you're using a Sigma lens. There's a problem with it. That's why you're having poor results. You should try it with a full frame lens. So I did, and the results came in, and I triple checked the focus just like I did with my original test. And in fact, the Sigma lens did perform sharper than a Canon lens. So there's no problem with using Sigma lenses. In fact, if you're going to be shooting 4K, I would strongly recommend some of the Sigma glass, like this 50 to 100 or the 18 to 35. It's really, you're going to get the best results, and I'm not the only one saying it. The Camera Store TV and some other really popular YouTube reviewers mention that as well. So there's no problem with using Sigma glass. It's really going to be your best option if you're going to shoot 4K with this camera. Now that I got that lens off this camera, that thing's super heavy, let's talk about the codec. Now here's another big problem. The codec they're using is Motion JPEG. This codec is 10 years old or even older, and while some people say, oh, it's 422, it's intraframe, meaning each single frame in your image, 24 frames in a second, is a full picture. Those aren't really benefits. So the codec is really old, and there's two issues with that. One, it takes up a ton of room. It's 5 times larger than the A6300, the A7S II, the XT2, so you have way more file size. All your files are huge. So for example, if you're going to be shooting with a 64 gig card, you have 16 minutes that you can record on a 16 gig card. So you need a ton of space to be able to store it. Now on top of that, you need really fast cards to be able to actually record 4K. Now the cards that they recommend, they're compact flash cards in the proper speed. 256 gig card, which will record 1 hour of footage, just 1 hour, 256 gig card is about $300. So very pricey, not only in the storage side on your computer, but just to capture it, you're gonna have to spend some money, and I'm gonna have a tip for you guys here in a second. So the next thing, not only does the file size is huge, it's an old format, and you need a lot of space. The other thing is the actual playing back and editing of the files. Depending on the program you edit with, you may or may not have problems editing. Now, comparing the footage, H.264 is a lot more compressed, it's a lot newer, and playing back a A7S II file, for example, only uses about 5% of the CPU on my computer. This is on a MacBook laptop. Now, playing back the 5D, it uses about 15%, so a lot more power, but I could still play it back. Now, going into Final Cut, for example, the A6300 or the A7S II or most of the other cameras, it still only uses 5% of the CPU when you're playing back the file. Now, playing back the 5D Mark IV's 4K file uses 25% of the CPU. And keep in mind, this is just playing it back. If you throw some more effects on, that's gonna skyrocket. So going into Premiere Pro, which majority of people use, it used up almost 100% of the CPU, and it was skipping frames. So if you really need a really powerful computer, and even people that have $2,000, $3,000 computers complain that they can't properly edit this footage, it's because the codec is so old and so inefficient. Now, in order to edit it, a lot of people that shoot with, say, a 1DC or some of the previous cameras that had this codec, back when it was a little bit more acceptable 3 years ago to be using a codec like this, they typically convert to ProRes. So that's another step to convert all your files to be able to edit. So really a pain to capture it, to buy expensive cards, and to be able to edit it. So it's just a horrible choice. Why does it shoot Motion JPEG? Once again, it's the processor. The processor can't keep up, and it can't write the H.264 files. Motion JPEG is a lot easier to write, meaning you're gonna have a slower processor and still be able to write 4K, even though it's so much worse. You look at a Panasonic camera, a Panasonic G7, you can pick one up for $500, $600, and it does everything. 4K output, it has the new modern codec that's easier to edit, takes up 1/5 of the file size, you can use super cheap cards to record it. It just really doesn't make sense. This camera doesn't make sense for 4K video. Basically, it's just Canon saying goodbye to the majority of the video shooting market. Now that I'm done with my rant on the crop and the codecs, let's talk a little bit more about the actual 4K video quality and what goes along with that. First thing I want to mention is the rolling shutter, and everything is going to tie it back into the two biggest issues and the issues that make this camera basically kind of a failure, at least on the 4K video side. So the rolling shutter, you would expect it to be good because it doesn't have to deal with a ton of data. The worst cameras in regards to rolling shutter, the A6300 because it's pulling in 6K of data, and the NX1 pulling in 6.5K of data. This is pulling in less than half of that. You'd expect it to do well, but it really doesn't. Yes, it's better than A6300, but it's still worse than the 5D Mark III and the A7S II, a lot of the other cameras. Once again, it's just the processor is way too weak. That's why the rolling shutter isn't good. If you're in 1080p, it's gonna be good, but in 4K, not so much. So it's all leading to kind of a conclusion there. talking about the quality. The 4K video quality, if you're just looking at footage shot with it, like you guys are seeing here, it looks pretty good. Now, to me, that I'm used to really, really nice 4K, especially from the A6300, I can tell a difference right away. If you guys watch the Camera Store TV's review that they shot on this, I can instantly tell, yes, it's not as detailed as all their other stuff. Why is it not as detailed? Well, it comes back to the crop. It's cropping in, it's using less of the glass, it doesn't look as sharp. Has an anti-aliasing filter, and that makes it not as sharp as well. So it doesn't compare, it doesn't mean it's horrible. You can still get good usable results, get good footage with it. It just doesn't compete with other stuff that's on the market, and some of the stuff is a lot less expensive. Now, along with that, the low light in 4K is quite poor. Honestly, like some people I've talked to say 1600 is their kind of limit, maybe 2000, and I would say right around there it would be my limit. On the A6300, I'm up to 6400. The XT2 I just reviewed, I'm up to 3200. I'm comfortable there. And with the 5D Mark III and 1080p, well, 6400 is pretty decent, or 3200, 6400. So it's a step backwards in regards to low light. I would say kind of GH4-ish quality, maybe slightly better, but that's kind of what you're looking for. And you guys looking at this footage here, it doesn't look very good. Now, one thought I had is maybe if it'd actually be better to shoot 1080p in low light situations and just upscale that when you're editing to 4K if you want to put out a 4K file. The 1080p does do better in low light, but I wouldn't say it's worth it just because the resolution isn't there as well. So the low light is really, really quite disappointing as well. You're used to having a full frame sensor, good low light. You're kind of down to probably a Panasonic G7 Micro Four Thirds performance-wise. Now let's forget about 4K for a second. Go over to the 1080p. Testing it against the A6300, it is actually a little bit more detailed. So that's nice, even though it does have an anti-aliasing filter, it's just processing the data better, which Canon's been doing 1080p for quite a while. Now this next section is going to be an interview with a friend of mine who's also a filmmaker in town. He's been shooting with Canon for probably about 7-8 years now, since basically they started making these DSLR cameras that shoot video. And I wanted to get his opinion. He's been holding off, trying to ignore what Sony's doing, ignore what Panasonic's doing. He's one of the people that really wanted this to be a successful camera, so he doesn't have to switch brands. He knows it's reliable. So I let him borrow it and use it for 2 weddings. And I just wanted to get his opinion, what he thinks, and who he's going to be switching over. So let's go ahead and check that out. All right, guys, so I'm here with Aaron Mayo from Grace Media Films. He's probably the top filmmaker, wedding filmmaker here in Spokane. And I wanted to get his opinion on the 5D Mark IV. I left Canon a couple of years ago, and you've been shooting Canon for how long?
6 or 7 years now.
Yeah, for a while, and you're still shooting Canon. So I wanted to see how this compares to the other Canon cameras that you've used, some of the improvements, maybe something that wasn't as good as you thought it was. His info is going to be in the video description, and the clips you guys are going to see during this little interview, that's all his shots. So definitely go and check out his website, check out his films. And so what was your first impressions when you got this camera in your hands and started using it?
Well, when the 5D Mark IV first came out, I wanted to jump on and buy one. And when I found out that the 4K was cropped, it really made me step back and take a second look at it before I bought it, because 4K full frame is really important. You know, wedding filmmaking is very diverse. You have to be able to shoot in really low light conditions, and you don't have a lot of time sometimes to set up lights, and you have to have a camera that's very versatile. And it being a crop sensor, at that point I was going to have to upgrade a lot of my lenses and kind of just change my game on how I looked at it. So when Max gave me the chance to shoot with it, I thought, well, let me try it in 4K. Maybe it's not as bad as I thought. And you'll see in some of these shots that it's really zoomed in, and I'm not that close to the bride. I'm a comfortable distance away from her. I'm shooting very standard makeup shots, and some of the shots may look a little overexposed. That's something I noticed when using the LCD screen. It took a little bit to get used to from my former Canon cameras. Once I got used to it, the exposure was good, but if the shots look a little overexposed, that's why. But it was way too cropped at 4K to get any shots that were usable in 4K. So almost immediately I shifted to 1080, and I gotta say the 1080 is phenomenal. I've used the 1DC, and in my opinion, it's right on par with what I've seen out of the 1DC. It is phenomenal. As far as 1080 shooting, it's definitely a step up, a lot more detail. The dynamic range looks excellent. Once again, I haven't done side-by-side comparisons, but just what I've seen out of the camera from shooting quality, it looks really good. And ergonomics are phenomenal. I really liked the touchscreen for a usability standpoint during a wedding. Like, once again, you gotta be very quick. And you have the designated ISO button, the designated aperture and shutter, but there's sometimes in the menu system where you want to change from 60 frames to 30 frames. You want to be able to go into the menus and check a setting for audio. I'm not the kind of shooter that does everything in auto, so there's a lot of settings that I kind of play with through the wedding, and it can be frustrating when you have a menu system and you have to scroll through something, or even more than that, almost every shot I check focus by zooming in. And one of the things I try to do is keep the viewer looking around the screen. And how I do that is I will put the subject in different parts of the screen. Well, if I've got my review box all the way in the top right corner and I need to focus on something in the bottom left corner, I'm sitting there on the 1DC, on the 6D, and I'm having to scroll that box all the way across the screen. It takes a long time. And with the Mark IV, I could just hit where I wanted to focus, zoom in, and pull the focus. And that was a lot of fun. It made it way simpler and a lot more efficient. So in that sense, it was really cool having the touchscreen.
So one question I want to ask you is, are you going to buy a 5D Mark IV? You've waited a long time. You've wanted a camera that shoots, that you could do 4K with and stuff. Are you going to buy one of these?
You know, I'm not going to buy a Mark IV. I have to say, compared to the A7S II, Canon's color, in my opinion, is much better. The ergonomics are far superior. The screen is incredible.
Yeah, I agree.
On the Mark IV. The touchscreen, the usability, just all of that for Canon is phenomenal. But the 4K is just not usable. So you cannot buy this camera with the desire to get a 4K camera. It's not going to fill that need. So in that sense, and then really, that's probably the main thing. I probably will either go the A7S II route. I'll be looking at the 1DX Mark II, or something like the C300 Mark II, something like that. Because having full frame 4K, or at least something better than a 1.7 crop factor, in my opinion, if you're buying a camera for video in 2016, what month is it right now? October.
Yeah.
If you're not buying 4K, you need to review your buying priorities, because 4K is becoming a necessity. I don't anticipate producing anything in 4K for some time. My clients just aren't asking for it. I still have never had a client that said, if you don't shoot 4K, we're not going to work with you. But 4K gives you way more flexibility. So if you are buying a camera today, I would encourage you to look at 4K options. But if you are going to stay 1080 and you don't have a desire to do a 4K, then definitely this camera is phenomenal.
Hopefully that was interesting to you guys. So just like you guys heard in the video, my opinion of this camera is it's a 1080p camera. The rolling shutter is good in 1080p. It's more detailed. The dynamic range is better than it was previously. So even though it says 4K on the spec sheet, on some of the advertising, and it does shoot 4K, in reality, you should not buy this camera for 4K. If you've been shooting with a 5D Mark II, 5D Mark III, you really want to stay with this form factor and in the camera brand of Canon brand of cameras, this is going to be a decent job for you. Yes, it's expensive. There's cheaper options that have more features, stuff like that. But if you like the reliability of the form factor, you want to use the autofocus, the touch screen, and those kind of improvements, it's going to do a good job. And if you're making money on it, you're going to keep making money on it. So that's what I think it's kind of made for. If you just want to shoot 1080, that's fine. You guys could do that. So I promised you guys a little tip. So for you guys who are going to buy this camera, or even say you're buying it for the photos or for the 1080p, and you may use 4K every once in a while, here's a tip for you guys. So even though you're not supposed to shoot on SD cards, I tried out all my SD cards, maybe 15 or 20 of them, and I found one that works. So this card right here is the SanDisk Extreme 90 megabytes per second, 256 gig card. Now I have the 128 versions of these. I have the 64 gig versions of these, 32 gig versions of these. None of them work. I have Sony cards, PNY cards, Transcend cards, Lexar cards that are UHS-2 with the extra pins that are supposedly faster. None of those cards worked. But this card does in fact shoot 4K video. Now, the reason is, like if you guys know SSDs, usually the higher end, larger models are more consistent with their speeds and faster, or both. So even though the lower end models are rated the same speed, the speeds fluctuate, and so you can't record 4K. It's fast enough for a few seconds, then it drops down. Now, these guys, the 256 gig, the largest cards, they actually consistently hold almost 80 megabytes a second, and you need roughly 65-ish. So if you want to save some money, these are about a third of the cost of the compact flash cards. And they're going to hold 1 hour on this 256 gig. So after all of that, guys, honestly, I feel kind of even bad doing this review. I always tell the truth. I try to be as unbiased as possible, and I just have to tell the truth with this camera, and the truth is honestly ugly. So I'm not a Canon hater. I like certain things about this camera. I like the touchscreen, the video autofocus works great. I know the dependability is good. It's comfortable in the hand. There's a wide selection of lenses. There's a lot of good things about this camera. It's not a bad camera, but in certain ways, they really kind of neutered it basically, either on purpose or they didn't want to jeopardize their cinema line or whatever else. But I see this honestly as basically they're saying goodbye to most of the video market, which is kind of in that lower to middle range pricing. There's not a lot of people who are going to buy the cinema line. You have to be making good money to be affording those cameras. So Canon is saying goodbye, and it seems like they're okay with it. It seems like, hey, we'll get the people that just buy a Canon because they know the brand. We'll get the people that are going to spend a lot of money, but in reality, you have a big chunk of the market switching over to Sony, to Panasonic, to other options. So it's not a bad camera. I won't fault you for buying it if you know what you're looking for. If you're looking for a good 4K camera, please don't buy this. There's a lot of other good options out there. So thank you guys for watching. If you guys have any questions, you guys can ask in that comment section below. I'll put a link to this guy in the video description if you guys want to check that out. If you guys buy through that, help support the channel. And check out some other reviews that I have if you're new to the channel. Check out the Fuji X-T2 review. It's an excellent all-around camera. And you know what? There's a ton of people that instead of upgrading to the 5D Mark IV are selling their 5D Mark IIIs and going to the Fuji X-T2. It's a better video camera. In a lot of ways, it's a better photo camera if you're okay with switching brands. It's just an excellent camera all around. So check out that review, guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.